Back. Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Missouri, Ms. Wagner, Chair of our Oversight and Investigations Subcommittee.
Thank you, Chairman Henseling, and welcome, Secretary Mnuchin. Secretary Mnuchin, according to the most recent numbers provided by the United States Trade Association, Missouri exports support some 88,000 jobs in 2016, totaling $13.9 billion worth of goods. That's why earlier this year I joined many of my colleagues in urging the President to rethink his tariffs on steel, aluminum, and other goods. The retaliatory tariffs levied by Mexico will absolutely be felt in my home state of Missouri, which I noted earlier depends heavily on trade. My constituents are concerned that, as am I, that these tariffs will have a serious impact on our state and will create winners and losers in communities across Missouri. Mr. Secretary, as I mentioned before, some of these tariffs have targeted our allies. Can you describe in detail the expected end game for these trade actions, and what is the specific time frame you expect for these policies to achieve their desired effect?
Well, first of all, let me just comment. I share your view that exports create enormous job opportunities. So our overall view is we should be doing things to make sure that our companies can fairly compete and export fairly into these markets. We were in, I put these in different buckets. There's obviously the NAFTA-related issues, there's the EU-related issues, and there's the China-related issues. As I mentioned, this is something we meet with the President on weekly. The economic team is very focused on all of this.
Time frame?
I can't commit to a specific time frame, although, as I previously mentioned, NAFTA is now a big priority since we have the Mexican election behind us.
Mr. Secretary, I wanted to take a second to focus on China. In 2017, growers in the United States sold nearly 1/3 of their soybean harvest to China. The recent Chinese tariffs on American soybeans will hit Missouri hard and already have. Reports of farmers are expected to sell their crops at a loss. What would you say to my constituents that will be directly impacted by the President's actions on trade, especially vis-a-vis my farming community?
I can assure you I never was an expert on soybeans, but I've now become an expert on soybeans. I follow this market daily. I can assure you that we're focused on this. We are in discussions with Secretary Perdue and others about this. As I said, this is an unfortunate impact of what we're trying to do is get free and fair trade with China, and they have unfairly targeted specific markets, and that's not coincidental.
No, it's not coincidental, and it's causing real harm in present day to the farming community and the soybean farmers in my home state of Missouri.
And I can assure you I and the President understand that, and we're focused on that.
If trade relations with China remain strained, commodity producers in Missouri will need to find new markets, Mr. Secretary, for their goods. ASEAN countries seem to be natural trade partners. Over half of U.S. congressional districts export more than $100 million in goods to ASEAN every year. ASEAN countries themselves wish to see stronger trade relations with the U.S. If U.S.-ASEAN trade relations become more formalized, whether that's multilateral, bilateral, whatever it is, Mr. Secretary, would China be, I think, pressured to institute fair trade practices? I'd like to make sure that I do put in a plug that we enter into some of these bilateral or a multilateral with ASEAN countries in order as an opportunity to have new markets for my farming and ag community and others in the district. China's ascension, Mr. Secretary, to the World Trade Organization has done little to change its predatory trade policies. Mr. Secretary, how can the World Trade Organization be restructured in your thoughts to better restrain China's behavior?
That's a complicated issue that I don't have time to go through now. I'd be happy to discuss that more with you. Ambassador Lighthizer is really the expert on this. I would say, again, the rules-based system is okay if the rules are being followed. The problem is that, as you've outlined in the case of China, they are not following many of the things that they've
and they subsidize everything, Mr. Secretary. There are two kinds of companies in China, those that are owned by China and those that do everything China says. So we're going to have to look at some of, I think, those those issues when it comes to interstate commerce and such in dealing with the WTO. So I look forward to continuing our conversation. I thank the chair and I yield back.
Gentlelady.